Just when you thought it couldn't get any more bonkers at Celtic Football Club, and in particular these last couple of weeks, it's the 4th of November and I'm doing an episode of Celtic Transfer Talk. We've not even got a new manager in the door yet and we're talking about Celtic's next signing. That's how we roll nowadays. Chaos everywhere. What a season. Honestly, that's all I can say. What a season. If you haven't already, please make sure to hit like and subscribe. It would be much appreciated. I thank you all for the recent support, and I thank you all for the patience that I'm sure you'll show this week as I trip over to Denmark. That's right, I'll be there for the game against Midtjylland on Thursday night, so content will be a little bit staggered over the next few days. I'm recording a match preview today that will go live tomorrow, which means I'm quite busy this afternoon, and with this breaking news coming out over the past half hour or so, well, this is going to be a quick one. We're just going to kind of dance over things, go through the updates, and look at the next player who's being linked with Celtic Football Club, an exclusive from Stephen McGowan, given something very tasty to look at. So over the past hour, Stephen McGowan broke this exclusive via the Herald that Celtic are considering a January transfer swoop for Premiership star David Watson. That's right, David Watson of Kilmarnock. Apparently Celtic are contemplating a bid for the coveted Kilmarnock midfielder, in the words of Stephen McGowan, in this January transfer window. And that's down to the fact that his contract with Kilmarnock runs up at the end of the season, which means he is free to negotiate from January. The Bosman rule can take effect. And I think David Watson, with an expiring contract on the horizon, was always going to be a player subject to heavy interest of both Celtic and Rangers. Now, Rangers' name hasn't entered the conversation yet. It looks as though Celtic are trying to get in ahead of any Derby rival interest or any potential European interest, and we're certainly interested. So Stephen McGowan goes on to say that free to negotiate pre-contract terms with interested clubs in the new year, the 20-year-old is one of a number of Scottish players Celtic have placed under scrutiny as they look to maintain a minimum of 8 homegrown players for their European squad. A product of Kilmarnock's Youth Academy, Watson was shortlisted for the PFA Scottish Young Player of the Year in 2024 and has already racked up over 100 first-team appearances. One of his 3 first-team goals in the current campaign came in a 2-1 defeat to Celtic at Rugby Park in September. So, yeah, overseas teams have asked questions of Kilmarnock about the situation. However, with that contract expiring at the end of the season, their hands are now tied behind their back. They are at the mercy of David Watson and his agent's decisions, and he will most certainly move on from them. The question is, will it be to us as we look interested? I think one of the most interesting takeaways from the Stephen McGowan exclusive, and of course we all know that McGowan is very reliable when it comes to the Celtic news. I think one of the most interesting pieces here is apparently he is one of a number of Scottish players that Celtic have placed under scrutiny, in his words. So one of several Scottish players that we're looking at. We know that the number of Scottish talents we have available for European selection is dwindling. We're getting to the point where James Forrest will retire. We know that we're looking to maybe move on Stephen Welsh permanently, for example. We know that some players just aren't up to standard as well. And it's going to get harder and harder for Celtic to register those players. And we need to certainly start looking at ones that could offer something to this team. And I think David Watson, without a doubt, is probably one of the better options that we have within the Scottish football pyramid. I don't think he's a world beater by any stretch of the imagination, but he's certainly somebody who's captured my attention in the past. We've certainly spoke about him on this channel a number of times, and he's certainly somebody who at his age will only get better when he plays around better players and better teams. So I think he's somebody we should be looking at. People will obviously be quick to jump on the bandwagon of, oh, it's typical Celtic, going for cheap signings, going for expiring contracts and not spending any money. And I think in any other situation, yeah, I would totally be on board with that. But in this situation where we need to start signing some Scottish players, and certainly Scottish players that will add to the quality of our squad entering European competition, you know, this is just a no-brainer, really. If he's interested, we're interested, maybe it's time to make something happen at only 20 years of age. He's somebody who we probably shouldn't let get away. And remember, when it comes to David Watson, we have spoke about him before. I did briefly mention that. He was somebody who was brought up quite a bit alongside the conversations of Lennon Miller. Now, Lennon Miller, of course, we let get away. He's moved on. He's over in Europe, and it's not going quite as well as he would probably have hoped in Europe. He's not played a lot of football. Maybe that'll make a lot of these younger Scottish players think twice. I don't know, but David Watson was always the alternative to Lennon Miller, it seemed. Every time we spoke about Lennon Miller, and every time we spoke about the possibility of him maybe going to Italy, which he did, the alternative was always, what about David Watson of Kilmarnock? So for the people who like the look of David Watson, and for the amount of people who suggested him as maybe somebody else we could look at when failing to get Miller, this one's for you, because it certainly seems like a situation that we're monitoring, and I think we'll try and keep on top of going into the January window. And we've briefly mentioned it, but I think one of the main positives about looking towards David Watson as an option is the experience he already has in the top flight of Scottish football. This isn't a lad who's been put out on loan to the Championship and League One in Scotland and came through recently at Kilmarnock and showed a little bit of promise. No, this is somebody who's been relied upon quite heavily for the best part of the last 3 years. He's already played 117 games for Kilmarnock in that time, scoring 13 goals, assisting 5. I don't know if it's just not as eye-catching as what Lennon Miller was, but he's somebody that probably should get a lot more praise than what he already has. You know, the way that we all spoke about Lennon Miller and the way that the rest of the country spoke about Lennon Miller, maybe David Watson wasn't quite there at that level, but I think he's certainly deserving of a lot more attention. That is very impressive numbers for a central midfielder at his age. I mean, 20 years old. He'll be 21 by the time next season starts, and he'll already be close to 150 senior appearances for Kilmarnock. And that includes, obviously, a wee appearance or two in European qualifiers. So I think that he's one of these guys that probably has a recognised ceiling. I don't think there's a world in which he becomes this groundbreaking, earth-shattering level of talent. But why not take that punt in case he does? Even if he doesn't, I think he could be a very good option for Celtic. I think he could realise a good amount of potential at Celtic, and certainly could be somebody we look at as an option more seriously within the starting 11 in the future. He's only 20. So I'm quite happy to see Celtic's name flirting with David Watson at the minute. I think it's something that we should consider. And it will obviously make life easier when it comes to registering these homegrown players in European competitions. Of course, Stephen McGowan's article only suggests that we are monitoring that situation, the typical, and that Celtic are keeping tabs on it. It doesn't say that we've officially launched a bid or a contract offer, or we've spoke to him yet. That will all probably come to fruition in the month of January. And you'd imagine that he'll still finish his season off at Kilmarnock as well. I don't think there's a world in which Celtic would try and get him in early. I don't think there's any real need for that. Let him continue to play and let him blossom at Kilmarnock, bring him in the summer if that's the case. But we will face competition. Of course we will. Now that Celtic's name is out there and apparently we're plotting a swoop for him, I'm sure that will capture the attention of Rangers. I'm sure that will capture the attention of potentially other Scottish sides who are floating about the top of the league. And I'm sure it will capture the attention of European teams who have already been scouting him for these past couple of years. So there will be competition, and obviously it just comes down to David Watson and his decision. So yeah, we'll wait and see. However, one interesting takeaway is, who's going to be the guy to greenlight the signing if we don't have a manager? So I found this quite interesting, and it was well pointed out by the lads over at Four Tims in a podcast. We were told that Brendan Rodgers greenlights all the signings, and without a permanent manager in place, would there be a green light? Would there be a sanction of the signing? And if there's not a permanent manager in place, and somehow there was a signing sanctioned, then does that back up the whole point about club signings? And does that just add more fuel to the fire about Nicholson shrugging his shoulders and not having the answer to questions that were asked when fans were right in front of him? Look, I don't think ultimately it matters all that much right now, because by the time a potential David Watson transfer is arranged, I'm sure we'll have a permanent manager in place. Whether that's Martin O'Neill or somebody coming from the outside, I think somebody will be permanent and then we'll have a say in it. But it is just very interesting to hear about this swoop. It's almost as if what Brendan said about club signings could be very much true. But yeah, listen, we all know it is true to an extent. You know, we just need to know about the whole green lighting and who does have that final say. Did Rodgers have as much say as what Desmond said, or did Rodgers not have as much say as what he led on to believe? I don't know. I guess it won't matter until we start making signings in January. It's probably not something we need to get dragged into right now. But David Watson, what is your thoughts? Is it somebody who tickles your fancy? Should Celtic sign him in January? Let me know in the comments below. Talking about the manager hunt, We did allude to the fact that Martin O'Neill could be here permanently beyond December and into January, but we have obviously got options on the table. And one update, the only update that's really came out today, is surrounding one of the least favoured options amongst the Celtic support, and that's Craig Bellamy. The Wales FA Chief Executive, he came out today speaking about the situation and Craig Bellamy being linked with the Celtic job, and has basically said that Bellamy is going nowhere under his watch. So Neil Mooney has issued a hands-off warning to Celtic, reminding them that he's under contract until 2028 and has his sights set on the World Cup. So these are all things to take with a pinch of salt anyway. Listen, I've been honest about things. I'm not necessarily wanting Craig Bellamy as next Celtic manager, so it doesn't really bother me. But these are the kind of things that I think don't really matter anyway. Like, if Craig Bellamy speaks to Celtic and decides he wants to go to Celtic, I don't think Neil Mooney is going to be in a position to stop that from happening. Even if he's under contract, Celtic will pay the compensation. Craig Bellamy would leave, he'd come to Celtic. So I don't think it matters. However, it might just be an indication to the fact that Craig Bellamy is happy where he is right now. He's happy to continue with his job under the executives at the Wales FA. And that's that. And I hope that is the case, to be quite honest. So that's the only real update from the managerial situation this afternoon. If some people might look at it as Bellamy being totally ruled out from contention, and some people will probably just brush it off. But aside from that, not much. So quiet times in regards to finding our next manager. Right, that does it for today then. If you've enjoyed, you know what to do. Make sure to hit like and subscribe, and let me know all your thoughts in the comments section below as well. Apologies if it's felt kind of rushed and such today. I essentially leave for Denmark tonight. So I've got a lot to get done. I've got a lot to do before flying off on my first of 2 flights. So yeah, exciting times. Big week for Celtic back in the Europa League, and we'll cover that on the channel tomorrow. Until then, please take care of yourself. God bless, and I'll see you all next time.